For school principals, I think another great strategy, and it goes along with listening, but it's something that I've always done, is create like a principal advisory council. So I meet with a group of a cross-section of students, but a student advisory council that I meet with twice a month to hear from them. What are your ideas? What are your thoughts? What can we improve upon? What can we do differently? And they always talk about teachers, and the ones who know them best are the ones who slow things down and don't try to push curriculum. It's always got to be connections first before curriculum. And that's really hard in a high school where, like, if you're an AP teacher, your AP courses dictate what you're going to be doing every day. There's no room for flexibility. There's no room to add in, units that are fun. It's just all curriculum all the time. And that's hard for me to swallow. That's where we push the status quo and think about how things could be differently.
How do you navigate change? It's a question we think about often, and one that today's world expects us to be comfortable with. The challenge, however, is where do you begin? And how do you develop the mindset and skills to be successful? You're listening to Designing Schools, and I'm your host, Dr. Saba Kidwai, educator, researcher, and storyteller. Join me each week for stories and strategies that bridge the gap between research and practice, as together we explore how might we design schools. How does one become a leader? While many of us may think that leaders are born, research tells us otherwise. In the book, The Innovator's DNA, the authors share that we can develop one of the most important qualities that defines a leader: helping people move from idea to impact. After studying leaders from Apple to Google to Skype and many more, the authors share 5 skills that distinguish entrepreneurs and executives from managers. They are associating, questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting. A challenge, however, is how to actually begin implementing these skills, but perhaps more importantly, being able to scaffold the conversations about change that help us move from idea to impact. On March 10, I'm hosting a workshop for those of you who want to learn how to design these conversations that help us move from idea to impact using design thinking frameworks and digital tools. You'll leave the workshop with the strategies necessary to work with your teams to generate ideas, strengthen and deepen collaboration, implement ideas, and help everyone enhance and develop their innovation skills. I'm going to add a link in the show notes for you to learn more. And if you attended my recent launch event, I emailed you a code for free registration. 3 years from now, when we look back and reflect on the challenges we faced, how we utilized the funding that we gained and the technology that we invested in, the difference in outcomes will be the difference in the conversations we had today that allowed us and really planted those seeds, moving us from idea to impact. I'm delighted to introduce you today to Dr. Jeff Prickett. He's perhaps one of the most empathetic leaders that I've come across, who models and utilizes all of the skills and strategies that I just shared above with you from the Innovator's DNA. He's a professional educator who served as an elementary, middle, and high school principal. Over the course of his 25 years of public school service, he's also had experience as an assistant principal, dean of students, and classroom teacher. In addition to Jeff's work as an educator, he also hosts the Principal Leadership Lab podcast with his longtime friend and colleague, Adam DeWitt. In 2016, Jeff was named the IPA Kishwaukee Region Middle School Principal of the Year, and he was also in 2021 named the Illinois High School Principal of the Year. Jeff is also the author of Becoming Principal, a leadership journey and story of school community. So I begin by asking Jeff, how did he become a leader?
Thank you. First of all, thanks for having me on. I'm so thrilled to be here today. The title, Becoming Principal, is very personal. I feel like it's kind of strange because as I hit or was about to hit my 50th birthday, which also kind of coincided with my 25th year, like 25th anniversary in public education, right? Or almost around the same time, a few months off. But I really took a reflective stance and started thinking, like, why how did I get here? How did I get here? Here I am, the principal of two high school campuses, right? I've been a middle school principal, and I was also an elementary principal. So over the course of 25 years, I've done everything from being a teacher to being a dean to assistant principal, and then the bulk of my career as a building principal leading campuses. And I just started thinking, like, how did I get here? And so I've always been a writer, and I've always written mostly fiction. And the idea for this book came out of, like, I just feel like I need to give something back to the profession and give something, like, honor those first 8 years of my building principal career, which was at that elementary school. And so the title of Becoming Principal really was a reflection of, how does one become a principal? As I go in there, and I guess one of the points that you mentioned started out at the very first interview for that principal position, where I'm sitting across the table from a whole host of, maybe there were probably 20 people in the interview. And I'm at my first ever principal interview. And I get across, they go around and they start from on the left, and there's a building, another principal introduces herself to me, and then a parent, and then a teacher. And we get across, and directly across from me sits the mayor. And I was floored and thinking, like, why is the mayor here at an interview for a building principal? And I thought that was my first time thinking, like, I'm not worthy of this job. If this is this important that the mayor is here, I'm not worthy. And when we get back to me, I say to them, just so you all know, I know you can see this on my resume already. You must have called me in for some reason, but I don't know the first thing about being an elementary principal. First grade kindergarten teachers scare me because they have such a huge responsibility, like teaching kids how to read. I don't know I can teach my own kids how to read. I'm sure I had a hand in that, but so it was just wild in thinking that I'm about to be a building principal, and now I don't know the first thing about being a principal. And it was those people, those kids, those teachers, that community that taught me how to become a principal. That was the biggest realization for me.
It was the kids, the teachers, the community who taught me how. That's Jeff's first inflection point in realizing how he became the leader he is today. Jeff opens his book by sharing the details of his first interview. I'm going to read you an excerpt because the sentiments he shares are the same that go through everyone's mind every time we step into a new role and we step into becoming the next version of ourselves. He writes, "Walking into my first ever interview for principal, my heart was pounding, and truthfully, I was not holding out much hope. It was not that I didn't have confidence in myself or my abilities. Well, maybe a little of that, he says. But I just didn't have the experience. There was no way I thought they were going to hire me. What could I bring to the table? What did I have? A middle school assistant principal with a few years of prior teaching experience over someone else who would likely have years of experience? One of the greatest barriers we impose upon ourselves is thinking that we have to have all the right answers. Design thinking frameworks give us the confidence to recognize it's not about having the answers. It's about creating the time and space to bring diverse voices to the table to discover the answers together. I asked Jeff to share another inflection point that shaped him into the leader he is today.
I think it was maybe a few years in, maybe it was only a couple of years in, when I had a group of parents who would wait outside. And I tell this story in the book too. But I had a group of parents that would wait outside for their kids to go in, and I would watch out the window, and we had this big floor to ceiling glass doors and windows at the front of the building. And I would say to my secretary, Maggie was her name, why are they waiting out there? Why they wait for a half hour, 45 minutes. And we were in a very highly Spanish speaking area. It's probably 72% Spanish speaking. And I didn't know Spanish, I still don't. And which was another reason why I thought, why are you hiring me? Why me? And anyway, we can get back to that. But Maggie turned to me and she said, "Jeff, you you have to realize that these are their babies. These are first graders. I think kindergarten had moved out of the building at the time and was in its own center. So our youngest kids were first graders. And she said, these are their babies. For them, like, they trust us, but they want to hang out for a while and make sure that their kids are not going to come screaming back out the front door waiting for them. And they want to be there for them if they are. And I said, well, we have to get them to go. Like, they have to go. And she said, well, why don't you go tell them that? I said, I'm not going to do that. But I will go out there and try to talk to them. And so I did, and quickly realized that, oh, wait, these are all Spanish speaking parents. And so I tried to invite them in, and they're like, no, we don't want to go in. So the next day I took Maggie out there with me, and she translated for me because she spoke Spanish. And she said, they don't want to come in because they feel like their Spanish is not good enough. And I thought, wow, because for a couple of years I had heard that, parents maybe aren't as involved with their kids as we want them to be. Right. And that was my first realization that that's not it. That's not it. The real reason is that they don't feel comfortable and they're self-conscious about their ability to speak English. That's the real issue. That's why we're not seeing them in schools. That's why we're not seeing them. So we got this cart together, and a coffee cart, and I wheeled the next day coffee and creamer and sugar and cups outside to the parents. And I said, if you're not going to come in, then we're going to come out to you. So we sat around, and Maggie, my secretary, went with me, and she translated again, interpreted, and we had coffee. And they were, from that day on, I realized that, wow, things are not always maybe what they seem to be. And until you get someone who really is willing to dig in and ask the questions and go where people are at, if they're not going to come to you, then you're never going to know. You're never going to know. And that hit me. Like, everything from that moment on for the next, even up to today, I look at things that somebody come to me and they complain about something, and I push back, and I'm like, well, let's take a moment there. Let's really reflect on that and see maybe what the real story is by asking questions and by really digging in with them. And it doesn't happen overnight, right? It might take you a while to discover what's really going on. So that was another point for me.
We've all heard how empathy is a core leadership value. Listening to Jeff, you immediately get a vision for what this looks like in practice. It's perhaps one of the greatest realizations you have when you practice design thinking as a leader. When you begin with empathy, what you think is challenged by what you learn. Stepping into these roles often requires taking what we've learned from previous roles and stepping into new and often uncomfortable spaces that challenge us to think and learn in new ways. What made you successful at one stage might not always carry forward to the next. I remember my first transition from teaching to becoming the director of innovative learning at the University of Southern California. While my knowledge and practice of utilizing technology was good, leading a program wasn't about technology, it was about people. I soon learned it was about building trust amongst teams, helping people recognize their strengths and using them in collaboration with others. It was about listening to people's dreams and gripes and how we could use the technology we had to not just do things incrementally better than before, but to create new ideas that would elevate teaching and learning in alignment with our needs, values, and goals. I asked Jeff what the transition on becoming a leader was like for him.
That's a tough one because, I've heard for years about, like, you don't look like a principal, and so I think that the realization first hit me when I tell this story in the book too, right off the bat, when I was walking outside when the kids lined up that very first day of my first year as principal, and a dad says to me, I can already tell I'm not going to like you. And I'm thinking, what, why? Like, what did I don't even know this guy. I don't know who your child is. And so right then I'm thinking, okay, perception is reality, right? So people are going to look at a situation and they're going to think that, well, until we prove them wrong, that is their reality. So I think that to act like a leader or to look like a leader can sometimes go hand in hand. And we have to keep in mind too, and this hit me after a number of years, it took me a while to figure this out, that people don't know what goes on in the front office of a school building, right? I mean, that's why there's so much stock in a building principal having been a teacher as well, because I do know what happens in a classroom. I may not have been in one for a number of years now, but I was a teacher for a few years and I remember it very clearly. But a lot of teachers and a lot of other district or school employees haven't always been building principals, right? So to say that, well, you're not acting like a leader, I mean, unless they've done something egregiously wrong, they're leading in their own way, right? But I think the flip side of that is that you have to, if someone were to say that to me, well, or if I'm feeling like I'm not being respected and someone says to me, well, you're not acting like a leader, it's time to turn the mirror on myself and see, well, why would somebody think that, right? Why is somebody saying that or thinking that about me? And how deep is that? How deep is that run in your organization? You have to be able to listen first. You have to be able to stand at the back of the line and let others lead before you can actually lead them. There is definitely a level of respect that has to be built before anyone's going to follow you, right? If you want followers, you can't just think that you have the title of principal or president or director and all of a sudden someone's going to follow you. It's not going to happen. So there is a level of respect, and that comes with perhaps sometimes years of building trust.
We talk a lot about building trust here on the podcast. One of my favorite conversations was a few weeks ago with Adam and Larissa from Make Teamwork, who shared their framework for building trust amongst teams and why they believed it was the foundation for creativity and innovation. Devin Vidichka and I also wrote a 2-part series on building trust in schools last year, and he introduced me to the research of Brick and Schneider, who conducted extensive research on relational trust. In their studies, they found that schools with high levels of relational trust were 3 times more likely to improve in academic achievement, and those schools with low levels of relational trust showed little or no improvements. I asked Jeff to share how his values guide his leadership and allow him to build trust with his community.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, I think that first and foremost, you can't. I was just having a conversation with somebody this morning, and she's one of our new building nurses, and it's her first week on the job, and we have 2 here because we're a large high school, and so she's there alone this week after only a couple of days, and she's like, nothing like being thrown to the wolves, and laughing about it, and she was very positive about it because she knew that on the job training is being thrown to the wolves, being thrown into the fire is the only way to learn. You're either going to sink or you're going to swim, and so there's nothing that can prepare you for the things that come up in the day-to-day. There is nothing. And so I think that your values have to ground you. Your values, when things go awry, when things are unexplained, and a lot of times I'll tell people that that's not for us to know. They'll want to know why. And I'm like, that's perhaps not for us to know. If we are grounded in our core values, that's what guides us and that's what gets us through those tough times. So one of those for me is always family. Not that I hear a lot of people say, well, the school is our family, right? And yes, it is. Yes, it is. Kids spend a lot of time here. Staff members spend a lot of time here. But really, the goal of the whole school as family is that I'm going to tell you, Saba, if you've got something going on in your life, take care of that first. You're not going to be good for others if you're not taking care of yourself or your family first, right? You have to take care of that first. Too many people have said, well, check your baggage at the door. I say just the opposite. Bring your baggage in. Bring your baggage inside because it's who you are. It's what makes you, you. And in one of the chapters in my book, if we're speaking frankly, I talk about my issues with drugs and my issues with, growing up in a single parent household. And well, I had a stepfather, but, my father left. And those are issues that if we don't own those, own who you are, then they're always going to be sitting over here and you're not going to bring out the very best of you because that's part of you too. So bring your best foot forward. And that means all of you, no matter what you look like, no matter what shape you're in, and we'll work to fix that. We'll work to work through that, right? I think that's very helpful. Another value that I hold strong is tradition too. And I can't always say that I've held that true only because of my own ignorance. I came into a couple of school situations where I led a building, plowing through everything, wanting to start new initiatives, wanting to go guns blazing, thinking that I knew best. And wow, I met with a group of eighth grade teachers once in a middle school that I led, and we had a team meeting, just me and the eighth grade team, and there were tears in the room from some of my toughest, who I viewed as tough, strong veteran teachers. And they were in tears. And one of them spoke up and said, "Are we really doing things that wrong?" And that moment for me was like, wow, I have to slow down and honor tradition, honor the things that they have done here in the past while still not accepting status quo, while still moving forward. But you have to honor the past as well. That's important.
You might remember last year I interviewed Brant Menswar, the author of Black Sheep. Like Jeff, he also advocates to bring your values into who you are and what you do. Brant had a powerful analogy for how our values allow us to build trust and strong relationships with others.
The challenge, and where I believe we get it wrong when it comes to values in education, is we want people to adopt our values. We want them to say, here's what we care about. We want you to adopt this and believe that's what you care about. That is not how it works. That is not how values work. We need, instead of trying to get people to adopt, we need to connect our values. We need to build bridges from what matters most to us to what matters most to them. And when we build these bridges, we allow for incredible collaboration to happen because I can use my value to amplify yours.
What values guide the work that you do? And how do they show up? If you haven't read it before, I'll link Black Sheep for you in the show notes because it is a phenomenal book. Again, it's one of the things that I really look for on the podcast is not just sort of these philosophical ideas, but really the strategies that you can begin to implement immediately so that you can begin to see those outcomes. One of the things I also like about Black Sheep is Brant has an incredible assessment that really helps you identify your 5 core values in doing the work that you do. One of the reasons that many of us advocate for introducing this work around values early on is that too many of us have had to learn them the hard way later on in life through adversities. Like Brant, Jeff also shares how through adversity, he defined his values and ultimately a purpose larger than himself that he wanted to serve. In his book, Jeff shares, if there's one thing my youth taught me, it's that sometimes there are going to be hurdles in your life. Sometimes the path you create for yourself is not the path which you are meant. When faced with a hurdle, it's how you approach it that makes all the difference. I asked Jeff to share how adversity at a young age allowed him to find purpose and why he finally decided to share the stories from his own childhood adversities.
That's big. Yeah. For so long, I never shared that story, right? I never shared that story, probably until I got to the high school, where I realized that there are so many kids who probably need to hear it, not only about my dad and divorce, because so many kids can relate to divorce and so many kids can relate to being in a home without a dad, And my stepdad, God love him, he did the best that he could, but it doesn't replace your father, it doesn't replace, or your mother, or, your biological parent. And so it happened so young. And, I was maybe 8 or 9 years old and I remember it like it was yesterday, right? That's the impact that something like that can have on you when you're, I don't harbor any bad feelings or ill will towards him. We get along just fine now, but it still left a hole, where that figure in your life should be. And so I replaced it as I was growing up and through my teen years and even into my early 20s with drugs and alcohol. And that was the replacement. I get into heavy metal music and I was the lead singer of a couple of metal bands. And And here I am, this, now high school principal, and kids, when I tell that story to them, and I start with this, that there are a couple of times in my life where, I look back and I probably shouldn't be here. I probably shouldn't be alive because of some of the stupid things that I was engaged in. And then, of course, that, I've got them hooked and they just want more. And I tell them the story on purpose because, they're going through so much. And my point to them is like, man, if I can make it, so can you. But to your point, Saba, you won't unless you find something to replace that's bigger than you, right? And that's never drugs and alcohol. It's never drugs and alcohol. It's always going to be in probably human relationships, right? And so I found that through giving. I found that through giving to kids and to other teachers and giving of my time, and eventually discovered talents, other than the screamo metal. So there are many more talents than that, but we all have them. And so the purpose for me became to help people discover what those talents are. Like, what is your purpose? What are your talents? Well, I don't have any. Well, I don't believe that. You just haven't. It's like when someone says to me, I don't like reading, the common response, but it's a very true one, is that you just haven't found a book that you love yet, right? It's the same thing. You just have not found what motivates you, and you haven't found out, found a purpose yet in your life, right? And so I think that's what really has driven me and allowed me to continue moving. And when people think, people see me now, that knew me back in my high school days, they just are like, but why are you a high school principal? Like that was your most hated time of your life. And they're right. They're absolutely right. But there's a purpose, right? That's why I'm here, to share that story. I think that I talk a lot about it in the book. The book is about those first 8 years that I was an elementary principal. And I think that it was a second grade student who was stealing food, and she did it again and again and again. And it didn't matter how many times I spoke with her or her teacher, or we even brought the police in. I was going to try to intimidate her and scare her, and she did it again and again. And then one day I found her mother waiting for her to bring that food to her. So this little girl was bringing food to her mom so that mom could give it to the infant, to the baby, not infant, but a toddler. And I thought, wow, that is a barrier. And it's my job to remove them, right? It's my job to help people to understand, like, hey, this kid is not stealing because she's a thief. This kid is stealing for survival. And what is the barrier that we've created that is causing, not that we've intentionally created anything, but if you don't investigate and ask questions and really dig deep, you're not going to find the reasons for behaviors. That's the premise of restorative justice as well, which we are a proponent of, and I'm a practitioner of, is why is somebody behaving that way, right? Why? One other time that I didn't write about, and maybe that's the second book, is a student suicide. There was a point in my career where I had a 7th grade student commit suicide on my watch, and that made me realize too, like, every single child, no matter how old they are, single student needs to know somebody deeply in the school system, needs to know that somebody cares about them. How did we miss that? It's haunting.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell throughout all your stories and experiences, there's just this like profound depth of empathy that you have as a leader that I think is, you don't hear people frame stories and things like that in that way. And it's just like what you echo over and over and over. But I love that you do so without actually using the word. It's like literally just like how you live and how you practice. So speaking of children and wellness, and being a high school principal as you are right now, I can't even imagine what it must be like to be a student going through what everybody has been experiencing for now, it is almost touching 2 years.
Right.
And so, helping kids navigate uncertainty and ambiguity was something that we always talked about, right? Like preparing you for jobs that were unknown in a rapidly changing world. But this is now these kids not thinking about what's going to come in the future. It's what they're living right now in the moment. And so I'm just curious, like we know how overwhelming adversity can be, but we also know how powerful adversity can be if you're able to channel it in the right way. What are some strategies you're seeing work well for students, or what are some things that you hope to see change more in a sustainable way moving forward to help children like navigate uncertainty, ambiguity, and times like this?
Yeah, that's always that's the question, right? I mean, this is so uncertain, and here's where we have to just really, really talk to kids, really listen to them, and hear what their fears are, hear what they're saying to you, hear what they're thinking. The key is in listening. And so, in a school system, a lot of times your structures are such that there's no time to sit and listen. I've never found that to be as true as in a high school setting. We run an 8-period day, and you're just slamming through, especially those high level kids, those kids who are taking honors and AP courses all day long. There's no time to sit and listen. The only time they have is during lunch, and they just want to hang out with their friends during lunch. We instituted an open campus lunch so that they could leave if they're juniors and seniors and they keep their grades up, then they can go off campus for lunch. So I think that's important too, that they have some of that freedom and some of that privilege. But I think just really one strategy, and it's so simple, it doesn't even sound like a strategy, is to just listen. For school principals, I think another great strategy, and it goes along with listening, but it's something that I've always done, is create like a principal advisory council. So I meet with a cross section of students, sophomore through senior, not freshmen because they're in a different building. They're across town at my other campus. I will soon start a freshman advisory council as well, though. It's a student advisory council that I meet with twice a month to hear from them. What are your ideas? What are your thoughts? What can we improve upon? What can we do differently? And they always talk about teachers, and the ones who know them best are the ones who slow things down and don't try to push curriculum. It's always got to be connections first before curriculum. And that's really hard in a high school where, if you're an AP teacher, your AP courses dictate what you're going to be doing every day. Right? There's no room for flexibility. There's no room to add in, units that are fun. It's just all curriculum all the time. And that's hard for me to swallow. And that's where we push the status quo and think about how things could be differently. And it's important to listen to people and to teachers as well. Not only do I have a student advisory council, I have a building leadership team made up of a cross section of staff, not just teachers, but support staff as well, that I listen to, and we brainstorm things, because I can't be the only one making the decisions. So I guess that's another strategy, is to make sure that people feel heard and form outlets for people to be creative and to really think and discuss and plan, and then take action on those too. Don't just meet to meet.
Ask why, listen, be sure people feel heard, and most importantly, take action on what you hear. These are powerful lessons in becoming a more empathetic leader. While we may often feel the pressure to make decisions quickly, making the time and space to have conversations with your community yields powerful and sustainable outcomes. A few weeks ago, we had Nima Avashia, an educator from Boston Public Schools, on the show, who gave us chills when she shared.
Which was pretty consistent. Pretty consistently, young people are asking for school to be centered around relationships and around deep learning. Like, that is what they want. And it's also what they feel like we don't do enough of in schools at all. The schools aren't structured to meet their needs as human beings. We're not human-centered. And they feel that, like, in the most intense ways. And to hear that from kids all over the country, different ages, different settings, sort of saying that same thing, I think has in some ways also made it so disheartening to see the policy response, because the policy response that we have seen has only kind of confirmed their feeling, which is that like their humanity is not the center of the conversation ever at all in education in our country, when you get to the sort of like macro level decision making.
Change can feel so overwhelming, yet the one strategy that can bring clarity to the steps we take to create more human-centered environments is through creating student forums, where students feel seen and heard. Time and time again, leaders share that this was the most valuable learning experience they've carried out that resulted in better outcomes and deeper relationships. What often holds us back is not having the right frameworks to structure and scaffold these conversations. On March 10th, I'm hosting a workshop where we'll dive deep into these conversation strategies that you can use when facilitating dialogue about change and hosting forums, whether they be with your administrative teams, with your teachers, with parents, or with students and community members. If you want to learn more, I've added a link for you in the show notes. I asked Jeff to share what other strategies he's utilized to nurture creativity and innovation at his high school.
Well, I think that trust is deep, and it's so here it is in its most simplistic format. It is time. It is being able to take the time. It is building relationships. It is being with people. I have to be very visible amongst staff and kids for people to know me. If they don't know me, how in the world can I expect them to trust me? How in the world can I expect them to follow me? Right? And so it is time. It is building relationships. It is having conversations with people, both professionally and personally. It is checking in with people. It's all that stuff that seems so simple, but listen, I have 2,400 kids here, and that's a mid-sized school according to like Texas, but still, it's still a large system. And I sit on two campuses, and so for me, it's getting back and forth between each campus and getting to know my 600 freshmen, my 1,700 kids here. For staff, it's creating things like we do a chili cook-off, amongst staff. It's some fun things like that need to be built into the system. You have to take time for fun in the workplace. Otherwise, listen, I'm not coming to work every day if I'm not having any fun. Right? That is so critical to build trust. But it's also, here's the other piece. It's saying yes more than you say no. I had a teacher, I give you a quick example, just yesterday, came into my office. He was so hesitant to ask me because I think he thought I was going to say no. He has a large size old school video game like you would see at a restaurant. It's sitting in his house, and he wants to bring it into his classroom to use as an incentive, to use create some downtime. And I immediately said, absolutely. And he was wait, what? Yes? You said yes? I said, yes, bring it in. I love the idea. I'll come up there and play myself. I mean, you have to be a yes person. Don't be afraid of that, right? Don't always be afraid of saying yes because there's no data behind it, or where's the research to prove it out. Let's create that data. Let's create the research ourselves and then prove to other people why it works or why it didn't. If it didn't work, don't do it again. It's as simple as that, really.
I love that because it reminds me that so many times we think innovation has to be like something else or something that we do, but literally it can be something as simple as just giving permission and saying yes to encourage that creativity.
Innovation doesn't have to be huge. Too many people are afraid they hear the word innovation and they think they got to do something world changing. It doesn't start that way. Nothing huge starts huge, right? It starts small.
No, absolutely. So I'm kind of curious, what does innovation mean to you?
It just means taking a risk. It means taking something that's already been done and putting a twist on it. Innovating it, doing something a little bit differently. Hey, everybody, well, not everybody, but people like to play video games. Well, hey, I've got one sitting in my basement of my house that's just collecting dust. Why not bring it into school? I don't know. Why not? Why don't you bring a dartboard into the faculty lounge, play darts in there? Because that would be fun at work. Well, just putting a spin on things that have already been created. You don't have to create new ideas. right? You can, but that's where innovation starts. Your new ideas will come out of things when you notice that there's a need, right?
Absolutely. So you mentioned something about, trust is really just time, it's building relationships. And to do that, you have to be visible. And you're visible clearly within your physical campus, but you're also really visible online as well. And it's how I met you, is I believe through one of our Clubhouse conversations. And so, you also host a podcast, and, you're just so entertaining. You're so active across every single social media channel. I would love to hear from you what your thoughts are on the relationship between leadership and social influence, and how being visible helps you extend that culture of trust to people both within and outside your school building.
Wow. That's a good question. Well, you bring up something that I didn't mention that's related to this. It's that it's not only trust, it's not only showing up, but it's following through too, right? And so I think of things like Twitter chats. I think of things like Facebook groups. You can create those, you can be a part of those, but until you start showing up week after week and posting content and making time for that, you're going to be hard pressed to build trust, to build connections with people. And I didn't always realize the power of that social influence that people have online. But honestly, some of my closest relationships are with people that I've never met before. And I think that the pandemic had a lot to do with that. I think we've talked about this, you and I, before, that our podcast, the Principal Leadership Lab, was built during the pandemic. You were one of our, the first couple dozen guests. But I think that showing up, being a presence, following up with people, following through, connecting, reaching back to people, if they bring something up, and I don't take that lightly. I'll message them on the side and say, hey, I noticed that you posted this. You want to talk about that? Is everything okay? Is there any way I can help? I mean, that's critical. That's important. So that's important in person, and especially with a social influence, right? Is to show up and to follow through, because that builds trust too. If you don't follow through, people are going to stop coming to you, right? And say, well, this guy can't help me, or, he didn't do what he said he's going to do. So even if I have to, I don't have an answer for somebody and it's been a week, I'll follow up and at least say, hey, haven't forgotten about you, still working on it, still don't have an answer, whatever.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So I'm curious, you host the podcast now. I'm just curious to know if there's been like an aha moment for you in kind of being a creator, right? Because, it's one of the things that we're encouraging students to do so much. And I could go on about this for days and days, but I'm curious to hear from you, like an aha moment from kind of being on the flip side, being a creator and putting things out there, just what an aha moment has been for you in going through that process.
Yeah, that's easy. The first thing that comes to mind is the fact that I cannot tell you how many people still stay in touch with both Adam DeWitt, my co-host, and I, and say, wow, that was like a conversation amongst old friends. But that was our goal. That's how we wanted to create it. Just this conversation around things that matter, around kids, around education, around teaching and learning, and around leadership, around being a human. I mean, that's the kind of environment that we wanted to create. So I think that was the biggest aha moment, because we're like, wow, we wanted to create this, but I didn't realize the power of it. And we still look at you and I still stay in touch, and it's because of moments like that I think that are just real, like real moments. Like right now, this just feels like a conversation between old friends. That's what this feels like to me.
The relationships we build, both online and offline, are at the core of how we'll persevere through these turbulent times. From adults to children, when we ask people what they need, the unanimous answer is a sense of connectedness, deeper relationships. The first step, create a space where people can come together to share and listen. I recently hosted an event where I shared the trailer to my upcoming documentary, Designing Schools from Trust to Transformation. I had 2 parents from the school I researched, Design 39, join me on the panel. Hearing from them was by far the highlight of the event for everyone. I received an overwhelming amount of feedback about how moved people were in hearing from the parents. And it really made me pause and reflect back to other events I'd been a part of. And I realized that so rarely do we have parents join in the conversations about designing change in education. I say that as a reminder to myself and to everyone that bringing parents into the conversation is essential. Making the time and space for everyone to reflect on where we've been and where we want to go is the only way we'll create sustainable change moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, I asked Jeff to share what advice he would give to those who are tasked with leading this dialogue.
Yeah, that's tough. I guess I would start there, that it is tough. But this is what we do. The leaders lead. And we were talking, before we hit the record button, that this is what leaders do. And if there's ever been a time to lead, it's now. And I know that people across the globe have felt like, oh my gosh, I just want to run from this. In the words of my friend, Principal Salome Thomas L., I choose to stay. And I think because we need people to lead and we need people to stay. And I would think that if people are going into any type of leadership role, whether it's in a school system or not, don't be afraid of that. In fact, just do the opposite. Jump in with both feet. Get wet, get dirty. It's the only way to get in there and really, really learn and get to know people. Yeah, it's messy and it can be heartbreaking. But that's the business we're in. It's a human business across the globe. Just get in there and do it. That's just open the door and go. Just go. Just go.
It's your turn to join the conversation by sharing what you enjoyed or what questions you have. In a world where time and attention are so valuable, thank you for choosing to listen and for being a part of our Designing Schools community. Leaving a review for the podcast helps others learn about the show, giving them the gift of knowledge and allowing this community to help create access and exposure to ideas and opportunities others may not even know exist.